So, good afternoon, Alex.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for coming in. Our viewers are anticipating a fantastic afternoon conversation.
Fantastic.
And what we're hoping to tease out of you today is understanding a little bit about you, a little bit about your role, a little bit about the business. But mainly it's all about how all of those things, where you've come from and how you've got to it, and then your journey. So could you take us through some of that?
Absolutely. Well, let's try not to disappoint. Let's see if they find us of interest. I grew up in the UK. Obviously, I'm from London, but I also grew up very internationally with a lot of travelling due to familial reasons. I have a godmother who's Cuban-American, who's been a great influence in my life, so I spent a lot of time out there. Also Switzerland and France were big influences when I was young. And I ended up in university in Switzerland. So though I did my primary education in the UK, went for an American-style education in Switzerland, which I highly recommend, and hugely transferable skill set because you can do your majors and minors and things, and gives you a great insight into the professional environment. So that's sort of where I grew up. I suppose that my biggest thing in life is people. I have far too many passions. I love classic cars. I play a game called real tennis, which is actually the medieval version of tennis, which Henry VIII played. So you'll probably see it on television programs and things like that. Charity work is something that's really important to me. I'm exercise mad, and my day-to-day role is also people. So I'm head of the UK desk and high net worth relations for a firm called Ennis, and we are essentially debt specialists. We were started in around 2008, just as the crisis was kicking off, by our founders Hugh and Ida, and primarily we're a mortgage brokerage. But over the years we've developed, and now we lend against all luxury asset classes. So, to give a few examples, fine wine, yachts, watches, things like that. But then very much our bread and butter is difficult property purchasing. So trophy locations in the UK, helping individuals of a very financially sophisticated background, whether they're foreign nationals or politically exposed persons, or individuals who have an interesting background or interesting global wealth, we're very good at sourcing solutions for. And we've now developed into also offering credit securities lending, which is my personal new favorite because it's just so dynamic. And we're also lending pre-IPO. So, lending against credit securities, but pre-IPO, which is phenomenal, especially for entrepreneurs and founders, which I'm lucky enough to work a lot with because, these are dynamic individuals who've taken a lot of risks, they're growing phenomenal businesses. And, when you're getting towards that point of liquidity, historically, that's been when people have struggled to hold on to their shares and they've had to, liquidate some. So being able to lend against those pre-IPO, give that liquidity, and then those shares be worth significantly more down the line, it's just so exciting. We're also doing corporate lending, so that can be against strong corporate profiles, even buying stock, just giving people extra liquidity to expand against projected revenue streams, things like that. And then also we are looking into FinTech, and we actually are operating that space already. I recently did the Oxford FinTech course, which I'd highly recommend if anyone's really interested in that space, because we're heading towards that digital landscape anyway. COVID has massively sped that up. But everyone's always using buzzwords, and that's why I think it's really good to do the course to get that granular understanding of what we're doing. So
what people are talking about.
Well, exactly. And everyone uses buzzwords, Bitcoin and crypto and NFTs, and what is that? Yeah. Then people run for the hills. So I think that's really interesting, and professionally then on that side, we're starting to look at Bitcoin wallets. We're also looking at NFTs and all the other crypto asset classes. So that's a real cowboy world. It's very exciting. It's very fast moving. And you get to meet some incredibly interesting individuals through that. So that's essentially what I do at NS, and that's what they do.
And I think you told me prior to the filming that it was the last 3 years you've been with NS.
Yeah, so my career out of university, I worked for a private family office, and then I actually went into political PR, and I was a senior account manager for sort of PR and communications, political PR and communications company. Worked in the Palace of Westminster a lot. We did a lot of ultra high net worth advisory in relation to crisis management, communications, things like that. Very rock and roll world. Some very interesting contacts from that. And then I moved across to my current firm into finance, which is Ennis, where I am now. and I was one of their brokers originally, and now I head up the UK desk and the high net worth relations team. And I think the one trend throughout my whole career and life actually has always been people. People are fascinating, and they are just one of my favourite things about life. Like meeting you today, the great chats we've had prior to starting this podcast and things like that. You just never know where synergies lie or what people are going to like and how people surprise you, and in a wonderful way. So I think people is just the strong thread through that, and relationships and building ones that actually mean something. Because even through this FinTech course, I wanted to understand where we're going in relation to that digital landscape. Everyone talks about, at a lower level, robots taking everyone's jobs, or, will we even need financial advisors in the future and things like that. And what was really gratifying is that at that end of the market, certainly where I work, there is always a hunger for good relationships and people. And it's not actually who gets the best solutions for individuals to why they do business with you. It's, do they like you? Do you add something to their life? Are you going to be frank with them? Are you going to be honest? Part of the thing that I always encourage is never giving protracted maybes. Just absolute deal and relationship killers. Yes, we can do that. Maybe. And 2 months down the line, falls out of bed. I'd much rather say no or yes. Yeah. And I think that frankness is something you learn as you grow in confidence as a young man. But also, it's a great relationship building strength. People know you're not going to muck them around, and it might not be the answer they want, but at least it's a truthful one.
And you've saved two people a lot of time.
Yeah, well, that's it. Time is something you never get back.
Absolutely.
We're all fighting against that one.
And so you had a year prior to the pandemic. You had a year where everything was normal.
Yeah.
And then the pandemic hit. What was that like for you?
Well, I think the pandemic was incredibly trying for a lot of people. I think a lot of what one does in day-to-day life and the way people enjoy life is by engaging with other people in a more formal structure rather than, being a colloquial relationship, just going to work, seeing the lovely people that are involved, things like that. It's really important. And, we're, for example, at the moment, we're lucky enough to have a really lovely office. And as soon as I get out the elevator in the morning, the ladies welcome me. And, get down to we've got this wonderful cleaning lady called Irene, and the biggest smile, and she makes such a big difference to everyone's day, and it's part of the coping mechanism we all use and things like that. And I did a little bit of the NHS calling, actually, volunteering throughout the pandemic, and I think that, yes, there was obviously a health crisis, but the mental health crisis is very much there, and I think even more prevalent probably than the illness. So seeing people getting back to events, certainly from my end, it's a big part of my job, and people are really, really hungry for it and just genuinely happy to be there. And what's quite nice about it, during COVID, you saw a real lens focus. So, as advisors, intermediaries, things like that, people are generally just quite happy to hand off to you and, right, I don't really want to hear from you guys, just get it done. Throughout COVID, that I really saw that people refocused their lenses. They were a lot more engaged with their advisors and intermediaries, which I think a lot of people found challenging because they're like, well, why do you want to talk to me? But I thought was brilliant because it's a really good way to build rapport, build relationships. And when you have a more granular understanding of an individual, you can help them better. Sure. Though we are debt specialists at Ennis, and that's what I do for Ennis, a lot of what I do, certainly from a network perspective and working with people, is not related to that. It's just helping people or connecting people to the right people. And that's a really lovely way to work. It's really organic. People just know that they can pick up the phone to you, you'll be straight with them, and if you can help, you will. And that means that they pay you that same respect back.
And how, if at all, did it affect the face-to-face meetings? Because my thought is that business is done face-to-face in the world you operate. Was that the case? And then when it changed, how did you have to adapt?
Yeah, in some ways it's really engaging and exciting because, you're then having a lot more of a global reach with platforms such as Teams, Zoom, Google Meet, all of these different platforms. So you're speaking to clients that you wouldn't necessarily go and see, or you'd send someone who's more in the geographic location, certainly with the offices that we have. So having that broader reach for me was really useful. And also with the time zones and things like that, as a young chap, I'm not too fussed about being up late or early and stuff. So it was really useful to leverage that. From a personal perspective, I really struggled with it.
Really?
Because, you know, being in the room with someone and having a handshake or having a chat and, you know, things like that, you can very quickly do the intelligence gathering that you need to do. Whereas on Zoom, it's a lot more convoluted, it's much more formalized. So hugely useful, don't get me wrong, but I mean, my personal preference is in person, certainly.
They say that 60% of body language is lost
Yeah.
in a Zoom call. If
Yeah.
you are trying to make rapport
Yeah.
with a potential
Yeah.
contact, it doesn't need just to be a client.
Yeah.
To not have that,
Yeah. I mean, you know, for me, if I ever work with a client, whether they're B2B or B2C, I want to know who they are
yes,
and what they do, and I want them to know who I am and what I do, whether that's professional or personal, because then you have a really good feeling for each other, whether you like each other, whether you want to do business together. I think that's where the most effective relationships lie. So I think Zoom and all those platforms are really useful to garner more intelligence, build links that possibly you wouldn't have got before. So very useful. But I can't say I'm not glad to be getting back out there, and there's a huge hunger for events and, you know, seeing people back in the room. You've got lots of big smiles, and, you know, I think also it's given people a real understanding of what they missed. You know, this sort of thing happened for 2 years and it flew by. And a lot of good things happen. You know, at NS we had one of the strongest fiscal years we've ever had. You know, business has been fantastic for us.
wow,
But you know, it also gave you a real feeling of the things you took for granted. You know, traveling, also just going and seeing people, and also, you know, by the nature of a lot of the stuff I do in my job and people do in their job, you have to know a lot of people and do a lot of things. And, you know, there's this real feeling at the moment, I feel, out there that people are just glad to see each other's faces. You know, it's like, oh gosh, how are you? What have you been up to? Are you well? And, you know, gosh, oh, you're not, or you are. Oh God, well, like, can we meet up for a coffee and, you know, get things rolling? So I think that's wonderful that we're getting back to that, and I hope that we keep going down that trend. And, you know, I think hopefully people are still going to be playing it safe, obviously, but coming back to this more, you know, collegiate environment, certainly in this small client, private client world that I operate in, where, you know, collaboration. I love collaboration. Collaboration is great fun because it takes you places you never thought you'd be. Like last week, I got invited by this phenomenal woman called Cynthia Morrow. Might be good for your podcast, actually. And she has started a brilliant brand called Covet, and it's a shared ownership platform for luxury jewellery.
oh wow,
And she invited me to an event which was in an old Chubb bank vault, which was with the IBV vaults, and it's a high net worth banking vaulting system in the basement of this building. And, you know, through that tenuous link, you know, I'd helped her with clients, and that great introduction and being in that amazing space, like, you know, it's like a movie set. And that had just stemmed from that organic sort of, you know, knowing each other, having conversations with people. That's something you can't get on Zoom.
the dynamics of that,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
And so when you look at that year and then the 2 years that we've just had, and you're coming out of that now,
Yeah.
my guess is that the forecast for you,
Yeah.
just because you want to be out there talking to people,
Yeah.
the forecast, because you said you had a really good year this last year. So in terms of the business, looking forward,
Yeah.
it's looking healthy.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, don't get me wrong, I think, you know, the lockdowns also gave people a lot of breathing space. And I certainly feel like, you know, I lived every day on lockdowns. If this ends tomorrow, will I be happy with myself that I've made the most of it? Because you generally had 4 hours extra a day due to your commute and
Yes.
sort of meetings you travel to and things like that. So for me, I did some things I wanted to do for a very long time. I restored an old car, which was really good fun.
What was it?
Got back. It
What
was an
car?
old 1984 Bentley Turbo R, and it was sold in Jack Barclay just down the road actually in 1990. And it's a car that I've always coveted because it was the last coach-built Bentley they made, but it was also a complete beast and a performance vehicle, 6 3/4 litre V8,
Wow.
turbocharged. So you get really good fun, and to, you know, that was a real bucket list tick. I've named her Beatrice.
I know
Yeah.
the listeners are going to be sending requests to see that
Yeah.
at some point. Do you have a journey of where you got it from, the restoration, and now
Yeah.
to where it is now?
Yeah, certainly, and you know, I grew up around old cars thanks to my dad, and it's just a brilliant thing. And I didn't tell my dad I bought it, and I just turned up in it one day and I can't believe it. You know, it's lovely. So that was really good. I really got back into my yoga, which is something I really enjoy, and I felt, you know, it really helped certainly with the, because also the other thing I think that happened during COVID is firms initially were worried that people weren't going to work from home. But the trend that I saw, and we certainly saw at NS, is people work harder. And actually the problem you then have is people need to stop working and have a differentiation between home life and work, and that's healthy. So we saw the complete reverse of what, everyone was worried about. So doing yoga for me was a way of keeping that mental and physical divide, which was really good. Was able to cook a lot more at home. I love cooking. So that was great fun.
What's your favourite dish?
My favourite dish to make for someone is probably full roast chicken with the trimmings, stuffed and everything like that. But it's a really lovely time.
You're making me hungry.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned you're involved with the rugby union.
Yes, absolutely.
What is that?
So, one other facet of my life is charity. It's something I believe very strongly in, and helping individuals. And there's this phenomenal charity that I'm an ambassador for as of this year called the Rugby Centurions. And essentially what we do is we take rugby players and their celebrity platform who've won over 100 international caps, which is...
So it's not just any old rugby player?
No, 3 in 1,000, which is staggering. So absolute titans. And we use their platform to teach leadership training, essentially, in schools that have been struggling historically and giving people a chance, but also to celebrate these players. I was really lucky enough to meet Brian Habana recently, and Brian O'Driscoll, who, my goodness, if I were to use one word, it would be humility.
Really?
These individuals are just lovely men who have huge humility, and the fact that they're putting back like that as well is just wonderful.
That's incredible.
So that's something I'm really keen to push, and always interested if people want to have a conversation about, please do reach out.
Can you explain to the listeners about what the objectives for that is? Real deep sort of understanding, if you like, as to
absolutely.
Why you did that and what it's doing.
Why I did that, I think the reason I went into that, I always seen from a young age that one should always put back, and if you're lucky enough to get up every day and be able to walk and see the people you love and things like that, you should be able to help people who are less fortunate than yourself. And I think tangible differences is one of the things that I really like to see in a charity, and certainly with the Rugby Centurions I've seen that. I think I'm probably about 15 or something, I've always been engaged with charity work. I started with Help for Heroes when I was at my old school. I was captain of a few of the teams, and we used that platform to do some charity matches and things like that. And then ended up where I am today. And for example, the CEO of Rugby Centurions, Chris Evans, amazing guy. His wife's even cooler, Victoria Gosling, who's out in Beijing at the moment. And those are two people who genuinely care, and you see a huge tangible difference in the things that they're doing and their charities are doing. So that's why I've ended up with them. And it's good. It's sort of rather self-interest, because it feels good to do good things.
Have you been involved in rugby in the past?
Well, I've only played at school and things like that.
Okay.
But my grandfather was part of the Scotland squad, and my father was Northampton Saints when he was young. So rugby household.
Wow.
So really, it's a game I respect and love, and great characters play that game. So sports, I think, is really important anyway. And if you can ever get any young person engaging in sports, that is, in my book, a massive win.
That's very, very impressive, how you, from a young age, have automatically really look to want to give back. And I think that most people would do well with that kind of mantra. And I think it's amazing. If we can move on now to an area which is to do with something you mentioned actually about 5 minutes ago, which is about mental health, mental well-being. We're trying to talk to owners and controllers of businesses about the management of the spotting of the foundation protection of staff, teams, how businesses can go that extra mile. I'd love to talk to you about sort of how you and your business are trying to do something different is there something that you could give our listeners to say, at the moment our business is trying to do this in order to protect them, to nurture them, to keep them longer, which all means that their mental health and well-being is the most amazing.
Yeah, I think as a firm we're still quite small. So
how many staff?
Personal relationships. So I think we top out around the 30 mark.
Okay.
Worldwide, and I think personal relationships are really key to how fluid and dynamic we are as a business, which we are. I mean, what we've got a phenomenal reputation for is problem solving.
Okay.
And at that level of the market, the ultra high net worth space, which is certainly where we operate and certainly is where my remit lies. It's all down to personal relationship, and if you've got good relationships within the business, those relationships then external to the business, I find go a lot better. So I think communications is a big one. We have, we're quite modern. We have lots of WhatsApp groups.
Okay.
We all communicate regularly, and then we have great fun events throughout the year. With COVID allowing and things like that. So lots and lots of communication, I think, is key. Certainly with I feel very strongly in my generation, things are much about free flow of communication. Before, I think with less delineated structures, having those formal reporting lines and things like that was very clear, and people understood them, and you just did as you were told. And I think that the generational changes that people want to be heard, not necessarily that that's going to be actioned, but that you're heard. So I think that's a really important element going forward.
I'd like to move on to, you're from London. Nobody is going to know more than yourself in terms of seeing London pre-pandemic, then seeing that pandemic hit and footfall just falling off a cliff. And now, so I'd really like to sort of get your experience of what that was like, that sort of 2-3 weeks before pandemic that you remember how busy it was, then what happened and your experience about that. And I'd love then to sort of get your take on how you've seen, and then most importantly what you think's going to happen going forward. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, pre-pandemic, things were, really, really busy, and we had so much going on. We were really, we felt like we were in quite a good stride, certainly in relation to the debt market in this country, though we do also do international debt, but interest rates are serious low, but obviously certainly with the London market you've got a mature market which is still globally a benchmark as to a great security of investment just physically. So we're really busy and we're cracking on, and lots of events and networking is a large part of what I do as well. And then the pandemic hit, and it was bizarre because we also thought, this is going to go away in a couple of weeks, and it was very much here to stay. And I live in central London, and I just remember after that first lockdown going down Knightsbridge, and there was no one. I couldn't see one person. And then I walked down to Pall Mall, and there was no one. It was like being in a film. It was really sort of zombie apocalyptic. So that was really eerie. But you know what? There were also positives behind that. Like the air suddenly became fresher. You heard the birds twittering in the trees much more. I don't know if that was the lens of life changing, but that was really eerie. And I think also in this very urban environment, which was really difficult, certainly for people of my generation, who are maybe struggling from a rental perspective or property perspective, you are in a very small physical space. And we were lucky in this country because there seems to be quite a lot of sensible approaches being applied, and obviously not across the board maybe, but people were locked in these small physical spaces without an outlet. And the world was uncertain, and I think people's anxieties and things like that went through the roof. And certainly in an urban environment, what can you do? There were times where you didn't know if you could buy loo roll, and that sounds fairly minor, but in this age it's not. It's massively concerning. So I think that people were very worried, and where I was just trying to take it day by day. I think that's where comms communications come in massively. And see where we're going, and then you you did hear stories of people dying, and then, you know, certain awful things would start happening around your sort of network of people. I have a wonderful friend he's in finance. He's one of the most generous, lovely men I know. And I hadn't heard from him a few days. And so I went over with a friend, and he'd been lying on the floor of his apartment for 2 days, and he couldn't barely breathe.
Wow.
And he was in intensive care and then in induced coma due to COVID on a respirator for 2 months. And then he got better, thank goodness. He had one less lung, but I'm pleased to report he's back drinking his beloved red wine and playing tennis and all of that. So, you know, there was very public, obviously, woes, but then I think everyone developed their own very personal woes as to, this is here.
Sure.
My God, people I know.
And do you feel a change now in the air?
I think definitely. I think, you know, there's also a quality of life issue here. You know, because yes, you know, this is a very serious disease, but what is life if you can't get out, if you can't engage? And certainly for a lot of people who are living paycheck to paycheck, what are you to do if you can't do that anymore? You know, it's really concerning. So I think from an economy perspective, we have got to get going, get back out there. I think people should be taking sensible precautions. But, you know, the resounding message I've been hearing, certainly in my network in the last month or so, is we're going to get back out there, we're going to keep going, you know, we want to see things start returning to normal.
The one phrase I've heard today, the one that I've not heard before, is revenge spending.
Yeah.
Fascinating concept.
Yeah.
That people would have, I'm not saying saved up, but maybe not have spent in the past on what they normally would have done. Yeah. And then to spend that money in a more aggressive way.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think that is quite fun.
Has that travelled over to business, do you see?
Yeah, I think certainly. And I think what's quite fun to see about that is, you know, it's always fun to see people enjoying like that. But also, and more importantly, I think from a generational perspective, a lot of people in my age range and below were, you know, able to save a lot more money than they normally would due to lockdowns and things like that. And I think that was reflected in the bottom end of the purchasing market, residential purchasing market, because it just, after, you know, at the initial scare, lenders got very scared. They retracted a lot of higher loan-to-value products and things like that. But then they came back and they were desperate to lend at high loan-to-values for young people. And also young people suddenly had a deposit that there no way, no how would have had. So you saw a huge boom in that end of the market, and also with all the governmental help and the SDLT and things like that. So that bottom end of the market just boomed, which was great to see, because you saw, and especially in this country, we have an obsession with holding property, and, you know, Spain, Italy, France, it's completely culturally the norm until you get a family to rent. That's what you do. But in England, we love our bricks and mortar. And so, you know, it's really gratifying to see young people, you know, buying in that end of the market. And yeah, I think that was certainly reflected. Could
you tell me how many networking events you've got planned for the next 2 to 3 months? Because
goodness gracious. Well, I couldn't put a number on it, to be honest, but it's safe to say quite a lot.
You've got a lot. So you've gone from nothing because of the pandemic, and then we've come through that. We've been on our Zoom calls.
Yeah, I think it was ridiculous to sublime would be a...
Is that what it's going to be for
definitely. But you know what? That's great, and I love it, and it's to be appreciated.
Okay, and I'd like to ask if you may tell the listeners if they could get a hold of you, how would they do that? Is it LinkedIn, and what 100%. What your full name and what it would be that they'd look for?
Absolutely. My LinkedIn profile is very black and white. It gives a really good feeling of the sort of person I am and the sort of people I deal with and how they feel about me. Please feel free to reach out anyone, and at that point I'll give you my number. I'm very informal about it. WhatsApp, telephone calls. I'm always happy to have a chat, meet for coffee. Or
is it your full first name, full surname?
So it's Alexander Robertson. There's me. I've got a really nice oil as my cover picture, which is Palace of Westminster.
And also the company?
Ennis, which is ENNESS, and Ennis Global.
Ennis Global is what somebody would type in on the on the internet.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming in today. Yeah. It's been really insightful. Thanks.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you. And to our listeners, another fantastic podcast. See you next time.